Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our webcast entitled Navigating the COVID-19 Crisis as a Not-for-Profit. My name is John Usanio. I'm a partner and practice leader for our Citrin Cooperman's not-for-profit industry group. And I would like to welcome all of you to our seminar. Before we begin, and on behalf of Citrin Cooperman, I wanted to extend our sincerest hopes that you, your families, and friends are all staying healthy and safe in these uncertain times. The effect of the coronavirus pandemic has been, and unfortunately does continue to be, felt in all aspects of our lives, whether it be at a professional level or a personal level. The social distancing, the volatility in the investment market, unemployment levels, and shutdowns that have occurred from federal and state mandates are all unprecedented issues that we're contending with. Not-for-profits, in particular in times like these, are often looked to assist and also aid those in the communities for which they serve. However, our nonprofits are facing extreme challenges such as have never been seen before, with the pandemic causing various cancellations, fundraising events, gala shifts, and even the ability to have volunteers or program outreach conducted. That being said, the tasks and the ability to continue to serve our constituents has never been harder or greater to achieve. Today's webcast, which is one of 5 that we will be hosting over the next 4 weeks, dives into some of these matters. Our agenda today will focus on certain crisis committee responses, risk management issues, as well as some recently enacted regulations at both the federal and state levels. This webcast is going to be recorded for future playbacks and will be available on our website. We encourage you to ask any questions through our Q&A feature in the toolbar settings. We have allotted some time that we will be using during the webcast at the end of the webcast to respond for this Q&A. However, if we receive questions and we'll be able to respond, we will do so as such. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Mark Sonnenberg, a partner in our Long Island office and moderator for today's panel. Mark?
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing all right during these times. So we have a really great panel of presenters here today. Along with John and myself, I'd like to also introduce Brian Gigante. Brian's a partner from our Bethesda, Maryland office with more than 40 years of experience. And also we have Alex Reagan, who's a partner from our Braintree office with more than 20 years of experience. Just in totality, we have close to 100 years of combined experiences here. So hopefully you'll get some nice information from a breadth of different resources. As John mentioned, we definitely encourage everyone to pose some Q&A, and we'll be monitoring that as the presentation goes on. We'll try and work that into our presentation, but if not, like John has alluded to, we've allowed time at the end, so we'll hopefully get to everyone's questions. So with that being said, to roll into the content, section 1 is referring to our crisis committee, and the first question I'm going to pose over to John. So John, what is a crisis committee and what is the role of the committee?
Well, in today's environment, we're seeing headlines all the time about crises that are being encountered globally and locally. It's unfortunately becoming a new global norm that we're facing and that boards are needing to respond to. And the response needs to be swift and rapid. Nonprofit boards in particular are now seeing these issues and problems that are occurring within their organizations, and in their fiduciary role are being tasked with trying to address them quickly for their community and constituents. One mechanism to address these in a timely fashion is the establishment of a crisis committee. And a crisis committee in general is just a body of individuals that are comprised to deal with immediate and long-term issues or crises that the organization may face. When you think about it, the topics that they should be focusing on deal with historical events and responses to how they were conducted, looking at present day situations and matters as they evolve, along with looking long term, looking into the future and seeing if there are any matters or fictional or non-fictional that may be projected or looked into so that they can be addressed in a timely fashion. One thing that's clear is that, risk is not going away. It must be thought of and dealt with appropriately in order to mitigate the exposure for organizations.
Okay, thank you, John. So along those lines, this next question I'd like to pose to Brian. So Brian, what have you seen these types of committees doing, and what should these committees be thinking about, especially in the current environment that we're all facing?
I think first and foremost, these committees should be communicating regularly with management and staff and supporting the operations of the organization. Regular meetings, honest communications, I think, is the way to go. In situations, if an employee tests positive, this is a complex challenge and one that calls for sensitivity, but a quick and decisive response. You should let talk to the person, express sympathy, let the employee share their feelings because anxiety is running high at this time. Next, you need to contact your HR partner to see what guidelines are in place. Third, you need to contact those in contact with the infected person, anyone in the last 2 weeks, notify them of the possibility and encourage self-isolation. Unfortunately, you can't mention the infected person's name. That's a HIPAA violation, and we need to be both sensitive and comply with the law. And we should speak with the organization's legal counsel if needed.
Thank you, Brian. So this next question for Alex. So Alex, the concept of a crisis committee may be a new concept for some people. So how does one or an organization go about setting up a crisis committee?
So everyone's crisis committee is going to look different. Every nonprofit is so unique and different in mission, size, programming, the method of program service delivery. The size and exactly what your committee looks like is really going to be dependent on some of those factors. You want the committee to represent what I'm going to call a mission critical team, meaning that all critical functions of the organization would have representation on the committee and a voice on the committee to make change and adapt to the crisis at hand. The key to creating an effective committee is that it has to be manageable in size, and it really has to be composed of leadership at all levels. So program managers that have strategic vision of the operations of the organization, big picture. They also have to have the authority to make decisions and implement change and do it quickly. A typical crisis committee might consist of CEO, COO, CFO, HR, program managers of critical programs, and depending on what role fundraising plays in your organization, in some cases you might have fundraising or development, maybe some PR people, and maybe even a representative from the board of directors from the executive committee.
All right, thanks, Alex. Kind of along those lines, Brian, what would you say an organization's board can do to help this crisis management team or this committee?
Well, the board's role is ultimately responsible for the organization and its policies and procedures. Again, its role should be to direct and support management in this crisis and any other crisis. It should be for the sounding board for the development and implementation of policies and provide a method to monitor compliance and effectiveness of these policies.
All right. So in terms of preparation, Alex, what would you say that the organization can now do to prepare for these types of events in the future? More of a long-term outlook. What would you say?
So, okay, I think we'll all agree after this that no matter how much you prepare, you can never really be fully prepared. But you can really be proactive in your risk assessment and think about potential risks. Risk assessment is a good exercise to really identify the areas of vulnerability. Response plans, you should have response plans in response to the risks that you identify. And the plans really, a couple key attributes of effective plans are that they should be simple, concise, and really easy to execute. The plan should identify what you need to do, when you should do it, and who should do it. In addition, you should have a certain protocol for various types of communications, both internal and external. You know, what is the messaging that we want out there? Who will deliver it, and how will we disseminate it? We can definitely learn from this crisis and crises past. The pandemic we're all going through right now is a huge learning experience in crisis management. You really have to look at what worked well through all this. This is a good time to recap, obviously later, what worked well, what didn't, where there could be improvements, and implement additional policies and procedures to address the gaps and the shortcomings that you find. There's one generalization, and before I had said this industry, everyone's so unique and different, no two are alike. But one generalization I can definitely make and say about our industry across the board is that there's a lot of sharing and collaboration between organizations because everyone's so mission driven. So, right now there's a lot of sharing going on currently, real time, and after this, there'll be plenty more of that. But there's also, you look at the trade associations, the various trade associations we're all involved in, and I'm sure there's going to be additional programming offered, as a response to this, as a result of all this that's going on, and some more sharing in that respect. So I think that's going to help people develop better, crisis management plans as well.
Great, thanks, Alex. So in terms of a crisis committee, obviously we're all in a time where a crisis committee is extremely important. Brian, do you think that this crisis committee or a concept of a crisis committee should be a standing committee even if it's not needed?
Well, absolutely, because I think it's always needed. The number and types of crises we face can only increase as we move forward in time. If I look at the last 20 years, we had a big crisis with 9/11. We had the stock market fall in 2008. Now in 2020, we have both the stock market fall and we have the medical crisis. As the world gets bigger, as technologies improves, as it becomes more of a global place we live in, I just can't believe that these crises are not going to increase, and for things that we're just not prepared for. I don't think anyone was prepared that with the coronavirus exposing such a big weakness in our medical preparedness system. I mean, I look at the wealth of America. I look what's going on in the stock market the last couple of years. I mean, we should have plenty of masks. We should have plenty of ventilators. We should have plenty of gloves. But we just never anticipated this. So, yes, I think we should have a standing committee. Is it really a crisis committee, or is it more just a risk committee? And I think that's where the long-term lesson comes out of this, because, again, no one could exit. I don't think anyone would have expected the double whammy that we have. But maybe we need to start thinking that way and build that into our plans and be more proactive in this type of situation, because there are plenty of business risk out there on a day-to-day basis. Look at cybersecurity. We all love technology. Because of technology, we can bring this, this conference and this information to you today. Our workers can work remotely because of technology, but look what the damage that can be done with cybersecurity and people hacking and things like that. So again, yes, it's got to be a standing committee. I'm not saying it needs to meet every month or every quarter, but there should be thought given to this, and there should be thought, put into the budget processes with this as well.
Thanks, Brian. So the one last question I'd like to raise on this concept of a crisis committee for John. So John, what are your just thoughts on overall communication in this matter?
Well, as everyone on the panel has said, I think the ability to have over communication is really one of the things that's needed. Whether it's to your donors, your employees, or your constituents, it's very, very important that you're communicating what your action plans are, how you're responding, what your needs are. That's very important, because the community is looking to assist as best they can as well, whether it's from a funding standpoint or not. I think that, as Alex mentioned, there is a lot of sharing that's going on in these times. There's a lot of good thought leadership that's been put out from a bunch of different organizations, and I think that one that I just came across recently was from a state society out west that has a very good template of crisis management. It's an entire manual that provided response action plans, whether it be internally for its employees, externally for media postings, as well as just an overall comprehensive set of guidelines to which follow and use as a template. I think that in the future, we're going to have more and more of these types of manuals pop up, and entities should really take care and due diligence in trying to replicate some of these matters.
All right, great. Thanks, John. Brian, did you want to add in one other thing here?
Yeah, I think it's important with communications that we communicate with our donors or our funders. I mean, they're aware of what's going on, and I've seen a bunch of people, communications going back and forth, both on the funding side to say, hey, we know what this is going to cause when it happens. We're open, we're willing to listen to you and to see how you react in this type of situation. And I think that's just a way of joint communications that will help the organization, and the funders deal with each other in the long term.
All right, great, thank you. So moving on to the next section, which is going to refer to risk management in the wake of COVID-19. And just a reminder to everyone, if you do have questions as we're going, please do feel free to post it to the Q&A section within our meeting. Next slide, please. So this first question is going to John. So John, how does nonprofits balance delivering on their mission while at the same time mitigating their overall risk?
Well, I think this really depends on the type of nonprofit and also the programmatic mission that the organization is striving to achieve. A nonprofit that provides, say, social services and outreach or community-based programs like meals or healthcare services or homeless shelters clearly is going to have to respond differently to this type of environment that we're in than, say, an association with members or even educational institutions with students. Each will have their own plan, their own ways to mitigate the risks and continue to serve its mission. Given the state and federal mandates that we've received, such as social distancing and non-gatherings or crowds that are coming into play, the ability to deliver on these core missions to the program has to be looked at. And then sometimes reprioritization of these types of core missions need to be factored in. What are the key programs that you can deliver best in the environment in which you're in, and what can you successfully accomplish during this time of crisis? The task of serving your constituents is getting harder and harder with the shutdowns and closures. You also have to think about the workforce, whether you have volunteers that are helping with the programmatic mission, or even your employees from themselves to being able to deliver on the core processes and missions of the organization. You're going to have organizations and nonprofits are going to have to weigh the benefits of conducting these programs and events and outreach for its employees and volunteers to ensure that their safety is being considered, and any potential ramifications that, should there be any issues or any, let's just say if there is an issue where they encounter or attract the virus, what is the ramifications to the organization? How will it be dealt with, both professionally, legally, financially, and things along those lines? The reality is that risk is not a new concept. Not-for-profits have been dealing with this along with all other type of for-profit entities for years. It's just that dealing with it now has become even more extreme than even some that had thought themselves to be more risk-averse and conservative in the approach hadn't envisioned, I think. Adapting to this new world order and this new way of thinking outside the box for organizations is going to be critical. Reprioritizing is definitely something that needs to be assessed and thought of as they move forward.
All right, great. Thanks, John. So Alex, very similarly, I guess, how do you see NFPs adapting under these circumstances while still staying focused on their mission delivery?
So organizations really have to be nimble, flexible, and creative. And, we're seeing a lot of creativity being exercised currently, given all the operational disruptions, the workforce, the office, program logistical limitations. Everyone's got to find creative ways to, as John said, recalibrate maybe some of the core programming and how we're offering the events. We've definitely found a way to get creative with the workforce and, working from home. Sometimes some of the organizations weren't equipped to do that. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. But a lot of the organizations have been successful in using technology to provide programs virtually. We've also seen some conferences and some galas move to a virtual format. In addition, I think, as I said before, part of a plan should include some communication to, some stakeholders, including donors. And, part of that communication can be used to appeal to donors, maybe to repurpose prepayments made for galas or events that were canceled as a result of this pandemic, or maybe memberships paid for services that aren't available, during these mandated closures. So I think it's just as far as, organizations finding a way to still offer programming in a reasonable manner. Again, as John had said, mitigating risk, keeping everyone safe, using technology and being creative in solutions to just kind of get through all this.
Thanks, Alex. So Brian, you kind of alluded to this a little earlier in your presentation. I guess, can you just spend a few minutes talking about remote work and cybersecurity issues and concerns?
Sure. Now, luckily, telecommuting or remote working environments have been used by not-for-profits for a while. Maybe not at the same level as they are doing today, but it has been there for a while. And so other than the social service agencies, many of the nonprofits I've spoken to have been able to move to this, a complete remote environment with only a slight decline in productivity. There certainly have been some bumps in the road, primarily in the transmission of data, both financial and non-financial, from the physical environment to the workers. One organization, they immediately had the mail forwarded to the chief executive's house, and they're still waiting for the first piece of mail to come. So they're still trying to work it out, but most of the stuff that we're working on was done electronically anyhow, so it's just a slight decline. I believe the real risk relates more to cybersecurity issues relating to controls in the home environment. Because I know our organizations, as most of the organizations I've worked with, there's quite a bit of investment into their infrastructure, their IT infrastructure, their security issues related to that. But some basic guidelines would be to use a VPN to connect to your company's servers and resources. Your home network is fine, but you definitely need to find some way of increasing security. You should also encrypt your home Wi-Fi. I'm at the point in my life, my children are mostly gone, but I know when they were home, everyone in my neighborhood probably had our Wi-Fi password, and maybe now's the time to change that and to be more, be a little bit more secure on that. Use strong words. Never save them in your browser. I know it's the easy way to go, but it's an easy way to get hacked. Definitely consider dual identification. Again, I know our system, our company, we are very into that. Talking to clients, and some people have, like I said, have gotten complacent and are just using a single identification. And a lot of them are moving to the dual identification just as a way of protecting data. And keep your software and security updates current. Consider a secure method for communicating with your staff, such as Slack, Discord, or Microsoft Teams. Because again, you just don't know who's out there, and unfortunately, people are just sitting home with nothing to do, and this is a way to fight boredom. But fortuitously, there are many web-based companies and resources out there to assist an organization in improving its capabilities and securities, even now on a remote basis.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, I think this this concept of security is so important nowadays. Everyone sure sees the news, and unfortunately, in the wake of everything going on, it unfortunately creates opportunities for people looking to hack into organizations' networks. And the concept of reputational risk when it comes to nonprofits is really critical. And I would say now more than ever, it's critical to take a look at your IT infrastructure, and if there are risks, now's really the time to try and take a look at that. Brian, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify that that's just not financial data. I mean, there's a lot of information in a nonprofit, whether it be if you're charity-based, your donor list, and so forth. So it's not just, again, the financial numbers in terms of the accounting, but there's also a lot of non-accounting data that should be considered in terms of your risk, your risk assessment on the IT and cybersecurity.
All right, great. Thanks, Brian. So moving on, this next question is for Alex. Alex, what should be the nonprofit's priorities and goals in the current environment that we're in?
So now's a good time to really reevaluate the priorities and goals in light of COVID-19. Something to think about is, does COVID-19 impact the mission in such a way that you have to really adapt and change direction? And if the answer is no, your priorities and goals probably will not change, but there are additional considerations to factor in as far as achieving success. The focus and priority will remain on provision of mission, obviously, but there's probably more of an emphasis placed on operating through disruption, which involves further consideration of the creativity in offering the programs during the crisis, as well as a host of liquidity considerations. Obviously the goal is to provide the mission while being sustainable and mitigating the risk through, number of things, through policies, procedures, engagement of stakeholders, and creating awareness. But through all of this, if we don't remain viable, it's going to be hard to offer mission. So, some of the considerations might involve, as John had said before, reevaluation of the program offerings in light of the strain placed on the funding and maybe even the participation in certain programs from the epidemic. This could result in temporary suspension of some programs during this time, maybe discontinuation of others, and in some cases, maybe even creation of complementary programs stemming from additional funding available for relief efforts for the crisis, depending on what your organization does. I mean, some of the programs out there are so directly in sync with the relief efforts that are needed during this crisis. There might be additional programs that come out of this. So I think it's important just to focus on the mission still, but just also on remaining viable so that you can offer those programs.
Thanks, Alex. I see some questions have been coming in specifically related to the payroll protection program, which is obviously a topic that is extremely relevant. We're going to cover a little bit of that in section 3. I would say that topic in itself it's really its own webinar, and information is being delineated on a daily basis from a regulatory standpoint. And John will talk about that in the next section a little bit, but I would say that regarding up-to-date information, you can certainly visit our website. We do have a toolkit where we're posting information as it comes live, and we do have some archived webinars on that specific PPP loan program, which will give you a lot of information. Like I said, we are going to cover it a little bit in our next section, and we'll try and get to everyone's questions. But if, in terms of specifics, I would just direct everyone to our site, which has a slew of information. So moving on to our next question, and this one is for John. John, what can a nonprofit do to protect from a funding or liquidity standpoint at this point in time?
Well, I think we've been talking, or nonprofits and accountants have been talking about liquidity for a number of years. With the new standard that went into play, talking about sustainability and liquidity for an organization and how that's reflected in financial statement notes so that readers, users, whether it be donors or funding sources, understand how the organization is doing, what types of cash reserves or reserves in general it has to meet uncertainties in the future, is definitely something that needs to be considered. We've said for a while that a certain level of liquidity should be contemplated by nonprofits. some have set various matrices that deal with, that have established funding of expenses for a 60 to 90-day period. Given the pandemic and the way we are in the situation right now, that may be a little short. Time will tell. But as we start to move forward, nonprofits are going to have to revisit the topic of liquidity, reserves to the extent that they can have reserves established, looking to the future for unknowns. One policy that I've recommended, and I know a bunch of us have also recommended to not-for-profits, is to put in place a liquidity feature, whether it be through a financing or commercial banker, that can help you in times of need. Whether or not you actually draw on lines of credits or letters of credits is not something, is something that in periods of crises or dramatic drops can be time consuming. There's paperwork required and the like. So having the ability to tap into an established line of credit, to make use of it for funding during times of crises, is oftentimes the best practice. Understanding that there could be some cost up front to incur it, but it is something that, even from a footnote disclosure or a tool to reach out and tell your funders, is sometimes becoming a more prevalent best practice. I think that you're going to see a lot more on this going forward. We are going to definitely expand on future webinars, financial reporting impacts, as well as sustainability and liquidity, because it is important. Looking at cash flow projections, looking at the ability to go forward is something that all users are definitely looking at, even more so in times of crises.
All right, thanks, John. And really, the last area on this section is, as John just mentioned, about cash flow projections, and that really kind of brings home the concept of risk management. So, Brian, what are your overall thoughts in terms of where we are right now for cash flow projections of an organization?
Well, I would say cash flow projections is a must for every organization, including nonprofits, and not just in the time of crisis. Now, if you do have your cash flow projection, it's time to challenge the original assumptions and factor in changes that needed, both in the delivery of services and in related financial ramifications. Really, cash flow projections is a great way to bring order and discipline to your organization in terms of what an organization can do or cannot do, or can continue to do, services to provide, as well as what it can afford to do. Certainly, there are going to be some things that the organization just can't do. But as I think both Alex has mentioned and John, we have to be innovative in terms of that. I know, like a local school district here, they're combating the shutdown by providing Chromebooks to all the students, or all the students that need it, type of situation. Virtual galas. But again, they all have a cost, and we need to kind of factor that into what can the organization do and not do. And as with any cash flow model, you should identify the key points and the possible ramifications at these key points if you've met it or haven't met those the requirements at that key decision point.
All right, thanks, Brian. All right, moving on to our last section. Next slide, please. This section is referring to regulations. And this first question I'm going to pose to Alex. Alex, please discuss some of the new funding and relief efforts that are available for all entities to ease the pain in terms of what's going on.
So there are so many different avenues and vehicles for support right now. There is a number of emergency relief funds being developed at the state and local level. There are various foundations and other organizations that are coming together to form conglomeration funds to help sustain nonprofits and help them continue mission during this time. For instance, in Boston, we have the Boston's Resiliency Fund. The Boston Foundation has a COVID-19 response fund. In New York, there's the New York COVID-19 Response and Impact Fund. There's new relief funds being created daily. A good place to go see what's current is usually state websites. Also, the various trade association websites have been pretty good about posting current lists of funds resources. So again, some of them are specific to relief efforts, specifically related to COVID-19. A lot of them are just aimed at helping you continue your mission at this time, and they're in the form of grants. But some of them they all have specific criteria, so it's good to look at that. It's also important to note that there are a number of funds still in formation, so they're not readily available to apply for just yet. But like I said, if you go to your state website and trade association websites, there should be up-to-date information. We had also written an article, and we included some of the funds, the bigger funds by region, Boston, Rhode Island, New York. That's in our COVID-19 toolkit, and I think there's a link to that that you should have received with the invite, but we have a list there as well. But in addition to that, there's a host of other federal legislations that's recently been enacted that will apply to nonprofits. A lot of that takes the form of low interest rate loans with maybe some forgiveness, in the form of grant meeting certain criteria, which we'll talk about more in depth later. But like I said, there's new things popping up daily, and it's just important to kind of check and see, what's available to be applied for, because I think there's new things available all the time.
Thanks, Alex. So in terms of federal legislation, there's obviously a significant amount in the news that I'm sure everyone has seen. There's legislation on sick leave and unemployment, federal leave laws, SBA loans, CARES Acts, etc. John, do you want to spend a few minutes talking about some of these items that are out there?
John must be having a technical difficulty. Again, there's so much going on and so much is changing on this that it's hard to be able to answer all the questions. So I think John's back now. Can you fill us in, John?
Sure. I apologize for that. Hopefully I'm coming through clearer now.
Yep, we can hear you, John. Thanks.
Perfect. So the new legislation that's been coming down the last couple of weeks, and even up until last week on March 27th, where President Trump signed into law the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which is better known as the CARES Act at this point, has really provided a lot of relief and a lot of information for the public at large, in particular with two of the programs that are affiliated with it. We're going to dive into a few of those now, but again, there is, as Mark mentioned, more information and separate webinars just on this topic that we have presented on and are available for playback on our website. I think what you'll find is that one of the new programs that has been enacted, the Paycheck Protection Program, better known as PPP, is a new loan program that is being administered through the SBA, Small Business Association, where they are utilizing federal funds under the SBA program to basically enact and have your employees stay with the organization as a means to limit unemployment, limit exposure for your employees. What it does is it has a covered period where it's looking for you to look at the prior years, look at your maintenance costs for employees. And if you are able to demonstrate continuation of that level, whether it's through covered payroll, then under the loan program, you will be able to have a loan for an 8-week period from origination date that may be forgiven over time. This is something new. It applies to 501c3s in particular. Unfortunately, it does not at this moment in time extend to 501c6s, but there is advocacy groups that are trying to expand that at this point. So time will tell. But the forgiveness of this loan is the interesting part. When you look at the forgiveness part, the 8-week period that it is covering really wants you to look at covered payroll, mortgage interest costs, lease amounts, rental amounts, utility amounts, and looking for you to be able to demonstrate that you've maintained salary levels and staffing. That if you do start to have program under your operations reductions in workforce or reductions in salary costs, that amount could be deemed unforgivable, for lack of a better word. In which case, the reductions and things along those lines would fall outside the scope. When you think about the computation and the criteria that's required in there, obviously there is a process that needs to be enacted and reviewed. There is a computation that says 2.5 times the actual covered payroll from the prior year, or average payroll, will need to be done. The application process itself, unfortunately, is not available at this point in time. We anticipate that the application will be announced by Friday, April 3rd. That is a moving target at this point in time, unfortunately, but the good part is that the SBA, under its website, does have a sample document of the requirements of what they're looking for. The program itself obviously will more than likely require that you provide documentation to substantiate the costs for payroll and the amounts going forward that you're claiming for forgiveness on through the loan program. The other part that has been enacted is the economic injury disaster loan, and this deals with working capital needs of the organization. In essence, what it's looking for is not to fund the same types of costs or impacts that are done under the Paycheck Protection Program, but is willing to make additional working capital needs for the organization at a discounted interest rate, which for not-for-profits approximates 2.75%. This program was available to for-profits as well, although those entities are at a higher percentage for the payback. But again, it's to subsidize certain costs and working capital needs. Interestingly, the program itself has announced that there is an economic emergency grant program where, upon filing the application, a $10,000 advance may be treated as a grant, irregardless of whether you actually are accepted into the program or not. So for not-for-profits, this is a very good item that can be used and should be contemplated and funded and reviewed from a funding and liquidity standpoint. There is also some charitable giving incentives for donors, which is new. Under the new CARES Act, taxpayers in general are able to deduct contributions from their personal tax returns, as well as corporations, up to a certain limit. But again, it's to incentivize donations and outreach to nonprofits. There is a very good template that exists out there right now that the National Council of Nonprofits has put out that summarizes the information and is available for distribution. It does talk about the processing and certain limits and thresholds, but again, we can also assist with the various nuances. The legislation itself is about 800 and some odd pages of reading and material, so very expansive and very detailed in its analysis, and we'd be happy to walk through that. But as Mark mentioned, the discussion can reach for a certain period, it can go for a long period of time. At that point, those are really the highlights of the loan program. I want to address some of the Q&A that we've received during this session. In particular, as I look at the nonprofit, if you have different fiscal year ends, again, that question is a great question, but again, it's looking at a one-year look back. The covered period that we're looking to achieve is from February 15th through June 30th. That's when the application can be submitted. That's when the costs are typically when you can apply for the funds in order to receive the funding. After your loan origination date, you must demonstrate an 8-week period subsequent to that in order for it to be matched and compared against. So again, I'm not sure if the year end is really going to factor into this, but it's something that is a very good question to look at. As I mentioned, the application procedures are unfortunately not finalized at this point by the SBA. We do know that it will be provided by any SBA lender as well as any other commercial lender that participates with the SBA. So you are anticipated to be able to call up your banker that provides this and see if they'll be able to assist with that as well. And go ahead.
I just wanted
Alex,
to
go
add,
ahead.
I just wanted to add, there is I know there's a sample application out there that many people have seen. And I've heard also that the banks are going to each have their own specific application to apply for online. So there is a sample out there showing people what it looks like, but that I don't believe is the actual application. It will be specific through the lender when it's available to be applied for.
Yeah, and just to add to that, because it's really important, the fact that, you know, this has been placed into legislation. However, the banks, and by the way, the banks are the ones that are going to be underwriting these loans, as long as your lender is an SBA approved lender. So we would highly recommend, you know, that you reach out to your specific bank on this for, you know, for a few reasons. One, you already have a relationship with them. But secondly, as I'm sure you can imagine, the volume of loans that are going to be flowing through these banks is going to be fairly voluminous. And if you go to a new bank, I would imagine that the bankers are going to treat their own clients kind of ahead of the line. And, you know, you may get placed at the bottom of the packet. So, you know, I would encourage you to reach out to your bankers now. Like John mentioned, you know, there's not a ton, they haven't got a ton of guidance on it yet. They're hoping that they get it on Friday, but you know, you can start to reach out, start to gather some of this payroll information. So when these loans do officially go live, you'll be ready to go. John, did you want to add anything else to this section?
I think the other thing that should be contemplated is that, you know, these programs can act in conjunction together. The only caveat is that they can't cover the same cost. So if you do want to apply for the emergency, the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the emergency grant or expanded EIDL, you can basically apply for both, but the cost can't be duplicative. That's one of the things that has to be contemplated.
Right, yeah, and along those lines with the EIDL, because there's some confusion out there. When you deal with the Payroll Protection Program, that is the program that will potentially be eligible for a loan forgiveness, while the EIDL could be a very useful tool in providing liquidity and cash flow. That is going to be a traditional loan. So you'll have to go through underwriting, potentially personal guarantees over a certain amount. I believe the period's going to be over a 30-year period. And like John mentioned, the nonprofit rate is reduced. So I think it's important to kind of take a look at all options for the organization. The Payroll Protection Program is a fantastic tool because it's almost, in essence, a grant that the government's going to be giving you if you will qualify based on it. So that's certainly the avenue that you want to take a look at. But obviously, you know, when you're looking at your cash flow projections and the overall liquidity needs of the organization, this EIDL certainly is a tool worth looking at. I just wanted to point out the differentiation that is a loan that will need to be paid back.
That's right.
All right. So I guess one last question on this section, and this is for Brian. Brian, just for you to discuss some of the tax and compliance deadlines and revisions that have been out there.
Sorry, I got it.
Oh, that's okay.
Let's talk taxes first. So far, the focus has been on extending the due dates of for-profit entities and individuals. And I have not yet seen anything on the extension of the due dates of 990s nor 5500s. That being said, any not-for-profit or employee benefit plan can apply for an automatic extension as long as it is filed timely by the due date of the return. For 990, that's 6 months, and for 5500, that's 2.5 months. Estimated taxes relating to UBIT would fall under the business guidelines for estimated taxes, and for calendar year organizations have been extended from 4/15 to July 15th. Each state has handled the issue of payments of estimated tax differently. Some states have extended both the due date and the payment date. Other states have not. Well, I know one state has extended both the due and payment date, but will charge interest on the extended payment date. You should talk to your tax preparer for what is right for you and your organization. As yet, there have been no extension on the filing of payroll tax returns for the first quarter of 2020, nor the depository requirements. As John and everyone has mentioned, there are several stimulus programs affecting payroll and payroll taxes. We are monitoring these programs. We'll post additional information on our website, through emails, and on social media as it becomes clear. For those not-for-profits paying sales tax, our best advice would be to talk with your state and local tax specialists. General advice can be found on our website. Specific advice can be provided as needed. But again, there's just so many states, and each one is handling it differently and at a different time. You really just need to go to a specialist for that. On the compliance side, several federal agencies have extended the due dates. For example, HUD has extended the due date by 30 days. For calendar year organizations, that would be April 30th. It's my understanding that OMB has also extended the due dates for uniform guidance single audits, but I've not been able to find that specific date yet.
All right, thank you. So a few questions have been coming in. A question that we just received. I received an application for the PPP this morning. It looks as though this is the actual application. It was advised to apply tomorrow. Is this not correct? So I would say on that, I would definitely recommend that you speak with your banker. We've been receiving information from various sources. Some of them are bankers. The application that John was referring to, it has been circulated, and we were just informed that that was not yet final. But I would probably go based on what your current banker is advising you. John, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I've gotten some correspondence that it may be out earlier, so it's very likely that it may have just been released. However, I have not yet seen the new documentation. So as Mark said, I would definitely confirm the originality of the information with the banker and submit as timely as you can. Again, it is a first come, first served basis for applications. So the sooner you can do this, the better it would be. And if the information is out and about at this point in time, we will definitely disseminate that alert immediately.
Okay. Brian, did you want to add something?
Yes. So I spoke with an SBA lender yesterday, and he told me they are having a call with SBA on Friday. So again, I've seen the form that the person is talking about. I think, again, we've issued I'll say a toolkit that will help you gather that information. But again, I think it's still a waiting game, and everyone wants to be first in line, but I think sometimes a little bit of patience may be the way to save you a lot of time and aggravation.
All right. There's a question that came up regarding A133 or uniform guidance audit implications to the PPP that turns into grants. Does somebody want to take that question? Great question, by the way.
So at this point in time, I have not heard of it being part of a requirement to put it on the CFA for Schedule of Federal Expenditures. I suspect more guidance will come out on that in the interim. Again, maintaining the documentation in order for the program to be forgiven in the form of a grant is definitely something that needs to be recorded in any matter in order to prove costs and to prove eligibility within the program. So I guess more to come on that, but at this point in time, I have not received anything from OMB that it will or will not be on the CFA.
Yeah, and kind of along those lines, we would imagine, like, you know, everything's very new and evolving quickly right nowadays. We'd be imagining that there'll be an ASU issued by the FASB sometime in terms of some audit implications, some potential reporting matters, and certainly this one regarding A133 uniform guidance audit implications. I think that's a really important question that's going to affect organizations that do have federal funds, whether they need to include it on there, et cetera. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to pass them along. While we're waiting for some more questions to come through, John, did you want to give a closing area?
Sure. So, you know, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us, but I think this has been a great discussion. I think a lot of good topics and information has been disseminated, and obviously more to come, as this is a fluid and evolving process at this point in time. I think that the industry in general has been very good at trying to make heads or tail of some of the risks that it's encountering and thinking a lot outside the box. And I think from an overall perspective, has accomplished a lot thanks to the technology that's involved and the government's ability to help facilitate this. Mark, have we received another question that's come in?
Yeah, no, a question just came in. The question reads, once we have the PPP loan, when does the 0.5% payment begin?
Well, I think that once you have the application in, and are we talking about the repayment of the loan, or
yeah,
the fund?
Yeah, I believe they're referring to, and the person that wrote that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you're asking when the repayment of the loan would actually begin.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question that we will have to follow up on. I'm not exactly sure of the time at this point, but I suspect, given the 8-week period from the origination date is when you may have the amount forgiven, there needs to be some leeway or grace period for when repayment begins. It's a great question. We will follow up and circulate that information going forward once we have clarification.
Okay. A question that just came in indicates that their nonprofit has 6 months of expenses, including full payroll, which is terrific. Should we still apply for the PPP? And I'll take that question. The payroll protection program is a terrific tool that basically the government is incentivizing organizations and companies to keep people on your payroll. So I would say the fact that you have 6 months of expenses for cash is a terrific thing. If you still would qualify for the PPP loan forgiveness, I would highly recommend that you still explore that option, because you can basically then utilize your cash reserves for programmatic and other organizational matters, as long as you're going to still be able to receive the loan forgiveness. And one other question that just came through is, how long is the repayment period?
So I think the repayment period really depends on the ability on which program you're in. As Mark mentioned earlier, the working capital loan was for, could be up to 30 years, I believe, and the repayment terms on the others, I believe it depends on the length of time. So we can follow up on that question for you and respond to you over time. I know that the webinar that we hosted literally this week, I believe, on the guidance does address some of those matters that we can find more enlightening. I think the max term on the SBA loan, though, is 10 years. So again, if it does not convert to a forgiveness, it would be stretched over 10 years.
All right, great. Thanks, John. And one last question. Is there any required GL coding needed to track the expenditures or payroll?
I think
Alex.
it's a best practice.
Okay, sorry, John. Alex, go ahead.
I would say there's
Yeah.
no specific GL need to code your GL that way. Just track it appropriately. No need to blow up your chart of accounts or your general ledger design. Just make sure you track the qualifying expenses appropriately so that you get forgiveness.
Yeah, and I think as more guidance comes through, there'll be more information out there in terms of what you're going to need to submit in order to get the loan forgiven.
Right. And with that, I unfortunately, we are at our time mark at this point, but I would like to thank everyone for joining us. I would like to also thank our moderator and panelists for all their time and insight on everything here. We are going, as I mentioned, we will be hosting weekly webinars on various topics, all COVID-19 related, and we hope that you'll be able to participate with us. I will say that we do have up-to-date information on our not-for-profit webpage that is provided in the materials here, as well as on our COVID-19 response unit webpage to provide you up-to-date replays on SBA loans, tax matters, as well as up-to-date news articles and alerts. I hope you found the topic and discussion interesting and illuminating. We will be hosting the next topic on financial reporting and internal control matters. And I hope that everyone has a great day and stay safe and healthy in these times. And we will see you on the next webcast. Thank you.